let us give Holly Holm her due,
Oh,
because
hey,
DC, last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, we said y'all must have forgot as far as Israel Adesanya is concerned. This Saturday, Holly Holm turned back the clock. Holly Holm turned back the clock, I should say, because Holly Holm, what she did on Saturday against Irene Aldana, someone who, let's be honest, the UFC was trying to showcase Irene Aldana. And there's nothing wrong with that. Fresh face, beat Caitlin Vieira, knocked her out in December, new contender, new opponent for Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes has pretty much cleaned out that 135-pound division. This was a big opportunity to use Holly Holm as a stepping stone. About to be 39, 60 pro fights, boxing, kickboxing, MMA. She's had some great days, but maybe those days are behind her. And what does she do? She puts on her best performance since the Ronda Rousey fight back in 2015. DC, she looked incredible. Not only was she aggressive, not only was she on point, not only did she have the right game plan, a career high 6 takedowns.
those
Unbelievable.
takedowns, those takedowns get you excited, right? For me,
They do.
especially for me, the takedowns get me excited. But when you look at this fight, right, you think, well, like I said, Taylor's oldest time. You have the up and coming prospect that's trying to get to the title fight. How do you make them real? You stick them in there with a former champion that's kind of on the decline, and you think that that's the way to get that person over. But Holly must not have got the memo. Holly looked as good as she's looked in a really long time. And I watched her on her bicycle as she normally fights, right? She gets on her bike, she's moving around the octagon on the perimeter, and she's kind of a sniper. As you attack, she counters you and she makes you look bad. Well, on Saturday, when she was circling, she got Irene Aldana to follow her, opposed to cutting her off. That's why you kept seeing that big circle around the octagon the whole time, because Aldana never closed the door, right? It's like you're going off to the left. If you're Holly and you're circling to your left, for Aldana to shut that door, she's got to take a right step to try to line Holly up. She never did that. So they just kept making a big circle around the octagon. And every time Holly got to her spot, every time she felt comfortable, she would explode with a combination. And she was landing these left hands over and over and just really piecing her apart. And then when Aldana started to believe that this is going to be a stand-up battle and she had a chance, Holly starts to mix in the Izzy-style wrestling. It was beautiful, dog. I've never seen Holly Holm wrestle so much and wrestle so effectively and just really looked as though it was a different class of fighter between her and Aldana. And watching that fight on Saturday, for as good as Aldana has looked, you don't think that there's much she would be able to do to change that result if these two were to fight and the fight played out as it did, because Holly put it on her, man. She worked her over from start to finish. It was never close. There was never a doubt in your mind as to who was going to win that fight.
It was inspiring. I've reached a point, you're already past this point, but I reached a point where I'm like starting to look at athletes and I hear people say, oh, this person is old, past the prime. And then I'm like, wait a second. I'm the same age as that person. Holly Holm and I are the same age, 38. And so to see someone who is towards the end of her athletic career and an all-time great do that against the youngster when everyone was saying retirement, and also she's been through a lot. Divorce recently, her father had a stroke, and to see her put on a performance like that, DC, now let me ask you this. Is it possible? And I don't think the UFC, because look, this is a situation. Amanda Nunes is the 145 champ and the 135-pound champion. We know that she's going to fight Megan Anderson in December, so they have a little bit of time. But let me ask you, the Holly Holm that fought on Saturday, can she beat Amanda Nunes?
So here's the problem with that, right? Amanda seems to be so far out ahead of him. But if there's anybody that goes into a fight as the underdog and overcomes those odds, we saw Holly do it before with Ronda, right? But the problem with that is she fought Amanda and she got knocked out and got kind of beat up. So I just don't know, man. I don't know if she's made as many adjustments as she needs to close that gap, because we're not talking about a gap of this size. We're talking about a gap where my hands aren't even on the screen anymore, right? That's how big the gap was between her and Amanda in fight number one, because Amanda felt no threat. That's what people don't understand. Amanda Nunes is able to do what she's doing there because she doesn't feel threatened at all. Nobody hurts her with punches. Nobody puts her on her back to where she feels uncomfortable. Nobody's been able to make her feel threatened for so long now that she's just mowing through people. And every time she does it, she gets more and more confidence to continue down the same way. I don't know if she has made adjustments to beat Amanda. But what I do know is we should live in what we saw on Saturday night, because that's what people do, right? You rush to what's next. And we're rushing to what's next for Holly, and it may be a fight that we saw her lose so clearly the first time. Why can't we bask in what she did so impressive on Saturday and not worry about what next right now? We can do that later.
Yeah, no, that is fair. We're sort of like the Monday show, so we like to look ahead.
No, I hear you, but I'm saying, like, no, we are. But it's like, let's bask in what she did, because
100%.
what are we going to do? Rush her into a fight where she kind of got outclassed last time. And then when you start doing that, you start talking about the greatness of Amanda Nunes and how she made her look before. And then the spotlight kind of leaves how impressive she looked on Saturday against tough Irene Aldana.
Like I said, she's not going to fight Amanda Nunes next because Nunes is booked, and I don't think that Holm's going to sit out for, if Nunes is relatively healthy after that fight, she comes back in March, April. The two fights that make the most sense to me are Caitlin Vieira, who won 2 weekends ago against Sijara Eubanks. Okay, that's fine. But really the biggest fight that they could do is the Germaine de Randamie rematch. They fought for the inaugural 145-pound title. It was somewhat controversial with de Randamie hitting her twice after the belt. She wins the belt, right? And de Randamie looked great once again on Saturday. Still a factor, picking up her first ever sub, a former AKA fighter, right? Germaine de Randamie from back in the day. So I think that that's the fight that would make the most amount of sense to see who's improved the most since their title fight back in Brooklyn a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the fight, right? And once these two fight and Amanda is done with her business with Megan Anderson, now you can justify either of them getting a rematch, right? Because if Holly looks as she did Saturday against Germaine and beats her, now we can point to, okay, she lost to this girl the first time. Now she's beaten her. She looked so great against Irene Aldana. So now let's see if she's made the improvements to fight Amanda. And if you put Germaine in there, watch Germaine fight Holly, and maybe Holly tries to take her down a number of times like Amanda did. And if she's able to defend takedowns and able to stay upright, you go, okay, now I can see her back in there with Amanda. Because guess what? In the fight with Amanda Nunes, the reason Amanda took her down so much, she wanted no part of the stand-up with Germaine de Randamie. And I'm sorry, earlier I misspoke. I said no one has made her feel threatened. Germaine de Randamie made her feel threatened. Remember, she was punching her and she kicked her in the head? That's when Amanda started wrestling, because Amanda went at her hard like she does everyone. And Germaine was like, okay, this is going to be a stand-up fight? I'm all for this. And Amanda had to pivot and showed how smart she is as a fighter. But I think they fight again, and the winner, you can justify giving them a rematch.
I feel comfortable in saying this in the UFC, because of course, if you're talking about the sport, you have to include Chris Cyborg, but she's the Bellator featherweight champion. In the UFC, the second best fighter at 145 and 135 is still Holly Holm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel confident saying that too. I agree with you 100%. Also, I saw a little tidbit on the internet this weekend. Holly Holm this year is on the ballot for the Boxing Hall of Fame. Right, I saw that somewhere that she's actually on the ballot for the Boxing Hall of Fame. So it speaks to, I think Kevin Iole posted that. He's a boxing guy. Holly being on the Boxing Hall of Fame shows the longevity and the amount of success she's had across two disciplines, which obviously are both a part of mixed martial arts. So that's big, man, to be on the ballot this year for the Boxing Hall of Fame, and also getting these wins at 38 years old. Remember, Ariel, my best year ever in MMA, I was 39. So time's not over yet for Holly Holm.
Yeah, and there is something to be said once again, like we learned 2 weekends ago, that there's levels to the game. And when you knock out someone like Caitlin Vieira, that's great. But then you fight someone like Holly Holm, who's an incredible, accomplished fighter in multiple disciplines. It's a different ballgame. So for Aldana, first main event, big time fight.